Story disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction and is intended for entertainment purposes only. The content includes dark themes, horror elements, and fictional depictions of rituals and sacrifices that are purely imaginative and not reflective of any real-life practices or beliefs. Viewer discretion is advised. This video is not suitable for younger audiences, and parental guidance is recommended. The story does not endorse or promote any harmful behavior, violence, or dangerous activities. Please note that all characters, events, and settings are entirely fictional and created for the purpose of storytelling. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events, is purely coincidental. Mimi, a young and ambitious lawyer in Lagos, is determined to make partner at her prestigious law firm within a year. She sacrifices everything, working late nights, weekends, and even sleeping at the office to achieve her dream. But when Ebe, a new lawyer with less experience, is made partner within 6 months, Mimi's world is turned upside down. How is he doing it? One fateful night, Ebe invites Mimi to a high-profile party full of the city's elite, where shocking secrets are revealed. Ebe made a pact for unimaginable success, but the cost: his soul and a life he can never escape. When Mimi meets the mysterious boss, she's offered a similar deal, an offer of power, wealth, and influence beyond her wildest dreams, but with a dark twist. Will Mimi give in to temptation? Or will she uncover the sinister truth behind the pact before it's too late? This gripping story is packed with twists, dark magic, and suspense that will leave you on the edge of your seat. Watch now to discover the secrets, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow for more thrilling stories. Mimi stood on the 25th floor of the towering law firm in Lagos, gazing at the bustling city below. The sun was just rising, casting a golden hue on the skyscrapers, but Mimi wasn't here to admire the view. She had just joined Maki & Company, one of the most prestigious law firms in Nigeria, and her goal was clear: become a partner within a year. It was an audacious plan, one that many would consider impossible, but Mimi was different. She had mapped out her path to success, and nothing was going to stand in her way. Every morning, while her colleagues strolled in at 9 a.m., Mimi was already deep into her work. She stayed late into the night, pushing through exhaustion, her desk littered with files and case briefs. Weekends were not for resting, they were opportunities to outshine everyone else. When others were out enjoying drinks and parties, she was in the office, her eyes bloodshot, her hands typing relentlessly. She had to get noticed, and she knew the key: clients. The more high-profile clients she brought in, the more valuable she would become to the firm. She needed the kind of clients that could shake the city of Lagos. The kind that would make partners look at her twice. Her hard work was starting to pay off. Small business owners began trusting her with their cases. She had even caught the attention of a prominent property magnate who promised to bring his entire portfolio to her. Mimi could almost taste the success, imagining herself in the seat of a partner, commanding respect and authority. But then, everything changed. 6 months into her relentless pursuit, a new face appeared at the firm: Ebe. He was young, sharp, and energetic, but to Mimi, he was inexperienced. She figured he'd be just another associate struggling to keep up. But to her shock, within a few months, whispers started circulating that Ebe was bringing in major clients. He wasn't just making waves, he was creating tsunamis. Clients were flocking to him, and not long after, the unthinkable happened. Ebe, with less than a year of experience at the firm, was made partner. Mimi could hardly believe it. Anger boiled within her as she sat in the darkened office, watching the partners congratulate him. How had he done it? How had he managed to eclipse her so effortlessly? She had spent countless nights sacrificing her personal life, skipping meals, falling asleep at her desk. And yet, he had swooped in and taken what she had worked so hard for. From that moment, Mimi couldn't bear to even look at him. She ignored him at every chance. He had taken the very thing she coveted the most. But one fateful Friday evening, everything was about to change. Mimi buried herself in her work, refusing to acknowledge Ib's rise. Every time his name was mentioned in the office, her stomach churned with resentment. But she wasn't going to let this setback derail her plan. She doubled down on her efforts, working even longer hours, meeting more clients, and expanding her network. Yet, no matter how hard she worked, it seemed Ebe was always a step ahead. He had secured several high-profile cases that left everyone buzzing. It was a Friday evening, and as usual, Mimi was the last person left in the office. She flipped through yet another stack of legal documents, her eyes heavy with fatigue. She was on the verge of falling asleep at her desk when she heard the door creak open. Mimi didn't bother looking up, assuming it was the cleaning staff. But a familiar voice cut through the silence. "Still here, Mimi?" Ib's voice was casual, as though they were old friends. Mimi tensed but kept her eyes on her papers, refusing to acknowledge him. "I just came back to change," Ebe continued. Mimi's attention shifted slightly. She glanced up and saw him, standing in front of the mirror, unbuttoning his suit jacket. He removed his tie and began pulling out a trendy shirt from his briefcase. "What are you doing?" Mimi snapped, unable to contain her irritation any longer. "This is an office, not your personal dressing room." Ebe chuckled, unbothered by her tone. "I live outside the city. It's Friday, and I have a party to attend. It'll save me time if I change here rather than drive all the way home." Mimi clenched her fists under the desk. How could he be so relaxed? Didn't he care about work as much as she did? "Maybe if you spent more time working instead of partying, you wouldn't need shortcuts," she shot back, her voice laced with venom. Ebe paused, meeting her gaze in the mirror. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. "You think working yourself to exhaustion is the only way to succeed here, don't you?" Mimi bristled, but before she could respond, Ebe continued, "Look, Mimi. I didn't get where I am by following the traditional path. Sometimes, you have to think outside the box." He pulled on his shirt and fixed his collar before turning to face her. "Why don't you join me at this party? You've been working hard all week, and it wouldn't hurt to take a break for once." Mimi narrowed her eyes. "I'm not interested." But Ebe didn't give up. "Come on, just for a couple of hours. You need to unwind, and who knows? You might meet some interesting people." Mimi hesitated. She had never seen herself as the type to socialize with her colleagues outside of work, especially not with someone like Ebe. But something in his invitation caught her off guard. Could it really hurt to take a small break? And perhaps, by mingling with the kinds of people Ebe was associating with, she could learn his secrets. After a long pause, Mimi finally relented. "Fine. But only for a little while." Ib's grin widened. "That's the spirit." She reached into her drawer and pulled out a change of clothes. She always kept a spare set in the office for the nights she inevitably fell asleep at her desk. As she changed, she wondered what kind of crowd Ebe was leading her into. Minutes later, they left the office and headed to a towering penthouse in Victoria Island. As the elevator doors opened, Mimi stepped into a world she had never imagined. The place gleamed with gold accents, polished marble floors, and luxurious furniture. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfumes, and soft jazz played in the background. It felt more like a palace in Dubai than a residence in Lagos. Drinks were flowing freely, and the crowd was full of wealthy men and women, many of whom Mimi recognized from the law firm's client list. As she watched business deals unfold over cocktails and laughter, she felt a sinking feeling in her stomach. This was where Ib's power came from. It wasn't just about the cases he worked on, it was about the people he knew. Her curiosity piqued, Mimi turned to Ebe, who had already downed a few drinks. "Who are these people?" she asked. Ebe leaned in, his words slightly slurred. "You're looking at some of the biggest players in the city. You want to get ahead in this farm. These are the people who can make that happen." Mimi's mind raced. So this was how Ebe had climbed the ranks so quickly. But as the evening wore on, she noticed something else. A few of the partygoers seemed to be paying Ebe particular attention, like they were more than just his clients. Curiosity overtook her, and she pressed Ebe for more details. That's when he let slip something that chilled her to the bone. "You want to know the real secret?" Ebe whispered, his breath smelling faintly of whiskey. "It's not just about clients or working hard. It's about who you're willing to make a pact with." Mimi frowned. "What are you talking about?" Ebe looked around, making sure no one was listening. Then, he leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "I made a deal, Mimi. A pact with the boss that changed everything." Mimi froze as Ib's words sank in. A pact? This wasn't just about networking or hard work, it was something deeper, darker. She stared at him, unsure whether to laugh off his words as a drunken joke or take him seriously. "You're not making sense," Mimi said, her voice a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. Ebe leaned back, sipping from his glass, his eyes gleaming with a strange intensity. "You think it's easy getting to the top in a place like this? It's not just about talent, Mimi. It's about what you're willing to sacrifice." Mimi's stomach tightened. She had heard rumors, whispers of powerful people making strange, unexplainable deals to achieve their success. But she had always dismissed them as nonsense. Now, hearing it directly from Ebe, it felt terrifyingly real. "What kind of pact?" she asked cautiously. Ebe swallowed the drink in his glass, staring at the liquid as if it held the answers. "The boss has power, Mimi. Not the kind of power you see in courtrooms. He's connected to something bigger, something ancient. I didn't believe it at first either, but when I met him, I realized there are forces in this world we can't even begin to understand." Mimi felt a chill run down her spine. She glanced around the room at the glamorous, wealthy crowd, suddenly seeing them in a different light. Were they all part of this? Were these people here because they had made similar deals? Ebe continued, "I made the choice to dedicate my life to his cause. In exchange, I get everything I want. Wealth. Success. Clients. But it comes with a price." Mimi was both horrified and intrigued. "What kind of price?" Ebe hesitated for a moment before leaning closer. "I promised to marry his daughter, give up my personal life, and never have children. In return, my career would skyrocket, and I would eventually take control of the farm." Mimi nearly choked on her drink. "You gave up your life for that? Your freedom?" Ebe shrugged, as if the decision was already made and there was no point in regretting it. "You don't understand, Mimi. Once you're in, there's no turning back. But if you play the game right, you'll get everything you've ever dreamed of." Mimi stared at him, trying to process what he had just revealed. The idea of selling her soul for wealth and power seemed unthinkable. Yet, the temptation gnawed at her. She had worked so hard, sacrificed so much, and still, Ebe had managed to surpass her in such a short time. Was this what it took to truly succeed? Seeing the conflict in her eyes, Ebe smiled faintly. "If you're interested, I can introduce you to the boss. He likes people like you, driven, ambitious. But be warned, once you make the pact, there's no going back." Mimi felt the weight of his words settle in the pit of her stomach. Was she willing to sacrifice her future for the success she craved? The thought was terrifying, but the idea of staying in Ib's shadow was even worse. Before she could respond, a man in a sleek black suit appeared at Ib's side, whispering something in his ear. Ebe nodded and stood up, adjusting his jacket. "I've got to go," he said, placing his glass on the table. "Think about what I said, Mimi. You're closer to the top than you realize." Mimi watched as Ebe disappeared into the crowd, leaving her alone with her swirling thoughts. Her heart raced as she stared into her drink, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Was she really ready to make a pact with powers she didn't understand? Could she live with the consequences, or was she risking far more than she could comprehend? Mimi spent the entire weekend replaying Ib's words in her head. She had always believed in hard work, but now she wondered if there was something more, something hidden behind the success of the firm's top lawyers. By Monday morning, she still couldn't shake the feeling of unease. But she needed answers. As the day progressed, she found herself struggling to focus, her mind drifting back to the mysterious boss that Ebe had mentioned. Then, just as she was about to leave the office late that evening, her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "You're invited. 8 p.m. The address is enclosed. The boss will see you." Mimi's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't agreed to anything, but the message felt like a summons she couldn't ignore. She stared at her phone for a long moment before making a decision. This could be her chance to finally understand what was really happening behind the scenes. And if she played her cards right, maybe, just maybe, she could achieve everything she wanted without making the same sacrifices as Ebe. By 7:45 p.m., she found herself standing in front of an old, imposing building in a quiet part of the city. The address led her to a place that looked more like an ancient mansion than a modern office. The dim streetlights cast eerie shadows across the tall gates, and the air felt heavy with an unsettling stillness. Mimi hesitated at the entrance, her nerves tingling with unease. She could turn back now, walk away and pretend this never happened. But the thought of being stuck in the same position, watching others surpass her, was unbearable. Steeling herself, she pushed the gates open and stepped inside. The interior was unlike anything she had ever seen. Luxurious, yes, but it had a strange, otherworldly feel to it. The walls were adorned with intricate symbols she couldn't decipher, and the air was thick with the scent of incense and something metallic. She felt as though she had stepped into a different realm entirely. A figure appeared at the far end of the room, a man, dressed in a long black robe, his face partially hidden by the shadows. "You must be Mimi," the man said, his voice deep and smooth. "The boss has been expecting you." Mimi swallowed hard, her heart pounding in her chest. She nodded, unable to find her voice. The man gestured for her to follow him, leading her deeper into the mansion. As they walked, the atmosphere grew more oppressive. The dim lighting and the strange, almost ancient architecture made her feel like she was descending into something far darker than she had anticipated. Finally, they reached a set of double doors, carved with symbols that seemed to pulse with a strange energy. The man opened the doors, revealing a lavish room filled with gold and exotic flowers. At the center of the room, sitting on a high-backed chair, was the boss. He was older than Mimi had expected, his face lined with age, but there was a sharpness in his eyes that made her feel like he could see right through her. His presence was overwhelming, and she instantly understood why people made pacts with him. He radiated power in a way that was almost tangible. "Welcome, Mimi," the boss said, his voice commanding yet strangely soothing. "I've been watching you. You're very ambitious." Mimi nodded, her throat dry. "I want to succeed," she managed to say. The boss smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "I can help you with that. But it will require a commitment, one that cannot be undone." Mimi's pulse quickened. This was it. The moment she had been waiting for. But the fear gnawed at her. Was she really willing to pay the price? The boss stood and walked over to a cabinet filled with perfumes. He selected one and handed it to her. "Spray this," he said. "It's a symbol of our bond." Mimi hesitated but obeyed, feeling the cool mist of the perfume settle on her skin. The scent was intoxicating, but there was something unsettling about it, as if it carried the weight of something far darker. The boss leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Now, Mimi, let's talk about the pact." The boss led Mimi to a marble table that dominated the center of the room. On it lay a leather-bound book with strange, unreadable markings on its cover. The boss gestured for Mimi to approach it. She could feel the weight of the atmosphere pressing down on her as she stepped forward. The symbols carved into the table seemed to writhe and shift under her gaze, their meaning just out of reach. "This is where it begins," the boss said, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. "You're about to enter a world of true power, Mimi. One where wealth and success are yours to command, but you must be willing to pay the price." Mimi swallowed hard. She knew there was no turning back now. Her curiosity, her ambition, everything had led her to this moment. The thought of being trapped in the mundane existence she had always feared was more unbearable than the darkness that loomed before her. The boss opened the book and revealed a page covered in ancient symbols. "This is the pact. It is sealed in animal blood and bound by forces beyond this world. If you agree, your life will change forever. But remember, once you sign, the deal is unbreakable." Mimi's heart raced as he handed her a quill, its tip sharp like a GR. The boss motioned to her palm, and she hesitated only for a second before drawing it across her skin, watching as the blood welled up. The boss guided her hand to the book, and the moment her animal blood touched the page, the symbols seemed to ignite, glowing with an eerie light. The room felt suddenly alive, the air vibrating with energy. The boss watched her intently, the smile curling at the corners of his mouth. "It is done." As the glow faded, Mimi felt a shift inside her, like a lock clicking into place. She had crossed a line she could never uncross. The pact was sealed. "Welcome to the inner circle," the boss said softly, his voice laced with satisfaction. "You will see your life change in ways you cannot yet imagine. But be warned, the forces you've bound yourself to are not forgiving." Mimi nodded, her mind buzzing with a mixture of excitement and fear. The boss's presence was almost suffocating now, as if the pact had drawn her deeper into his orbit. She had no idea what she had just unleashed, but part of her thrilled at the prospect of the power she would soon wield. "Your journey begins now," the boss said, turning away. "You will receive instructions soon. Follow them to the letter, and everything you desire will be within your grasp." Mimi left the mansion that night feeling a strange, intoxicating mixture of dread and exhilaration. Her fate was sealed, but she knew there was no going back. Over the next few days, Mimi felt different. It started with small things, clients that had been difficult to secure suddenly signed contracts with ease, her words seeming to carry more weight than before. People she had struggled to impress were now eager to hear her opinions. Her colleagues, once indifferent, now seemed to hang on her every word. But it wasn't just external changes. Inside, Mimi felt a growing hunger, a need for more. She was no longer content with small victories, she craved something bigger, something darker. It was as if the pact had awakened a part of her she didn't know existed. She began receiving cryptic messages, instructions on where to go and who to meet. Each encounter pushed her deeper into a world she barely understood, a world of hidden power and ancient rituals. The more she immersed herself in it, the more she realized how little control she had. The forces at play were far more complex than she had anticipated, and the boss's influence reached into every corner of her life. One evening, as she sat in her apartment, a strange symbol appeared on her phone. It was the same as the ones she had seen in the boss's mansion, the same symbols she had signed her pact with. The message was short and direct. It's time. Mimi felt a chill run down her spine. She had been waiting for this moment, but now that it was here, the reality of it was terrifying. She knew what it meant, the final step in her transformation. The message included an address, a place she had never heard of, deep in the city's old district. Without hesitation, she grabbed her coat and left her apartment, the weight of the pact heavy on her mind. The address led her to an abandoned cathedral, its once grand structure now crumbling and overgrown with vines. Inside, the air was thick with incense and the glow of candlelight flickered in the darkness. At the altar stood the boss, dressed in ceremonial robes, and surrounding him were figures cloaked in shadows, people she couldn't recognize. "You've done well," the boss said as she approached. "But tonight, you will become one of us fully." The cloaked figures began chanting in a language Mimi didn't understand, their voices rising and falling like a strange, otherworldly hymn. The boss stepped forward, holding a small vial of liquid that shimmered unnaturally in the dim light. "This will bind you to our cause, body and soul," he said, offering her the vial. "Once you drink it, there is no turning back." Mimi stared at the liquid, her pulse quickening. She had come this far, there was no point in hesitation now. She took the vial and downed it in one swift motion. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a sharp pain shot through her body, so intense that she doubled over, gasping for breath. It felt as though her very blood was being torn apart and reshaped. Her vision blurred, and the chanting grew louder, more frenzied. When the pain finally subsided, she opened her eyes and realized that something inside her had changed. She felt powerful. More powerful than she had ever imagined. The boss smiled, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "You are one of us now, Mimi. You have crossed the threshold. The world is yours." Mimi stood tall, feeling the full weight of the transformation. She was no longer the same person who had walked into that mansion. She had become something else entirely, something darker, something far more dangerous. The morning after the ritual, Mimi expected everything to feel different, but life carried on as usual. The city was still buzzing with its endless noise, her office colleagues still gossiped at the coffee machine, and the world, it seemed, hadn't noticed the shift in her reality. But Mimi noticed. She felt the darkness beneath her skin, a creeping sensation like something waiting to be unleashed. And it wasn't long before the first test of her newfound power arrived. It began with a phone call. A voice she didn't recognize, cold and detached, gave her instructions: "Meet me at the old factory at midnight. Bring no one. This is your test." Mimi's heart raced as she hung up. The old factory was a notorious spot, abandoned for decades and rumored to be cursed. Locals said strange things happened there, but no one could explain it. Tonight, Mimi would find out if the rumors were true. As midnight approached, she drove through the darkened streets, her hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual. The factory loomed ahead, a hulking shadow against the skyline. She parked her car and stepped out, the air heavy with an unnatural stillness. Inside, the factory was even more eerie. Rusted machinery lay scattered, and the walls were covered in graffiti, most of it strange symbols she now recognized. This place was more than just abandoned, it had been used by the very same people she was now bound to. In the center of the vast space, a figure waited. It was a man, tall and imposing, with a face that seemed to shift and change in the flickering light. His eyes glowed faintly, as though they held some secret knowledge. "You're here," the man said, his voice deep and resonant. "This is your first test, Mimi. To prove your loyalty, to prove that you can wield the power you've been given." Mimi swallowed, her throat dry. "What do I need to do?" The man smiled, but it was not a reassuring smile. "Simple. There is a traitor among us. Someone who has broken the pact. Your task is to find them, and make them live forever." Mimi's blood ran cold. She hadn't signed up for that. She had wanted power, success, wealth, but this was something else entirely. I'm not able. How do I make him live forever? She stammered. The man's smile faded, replaced by a stern, unforgiving expression. You took the pact, and with it, you accepted everything that comes with it. If you cannot complete this task, you are of no use to us. Mimi's mind raced. She had no idea who the traitor was, or how she would even find them. But she knew one thing: failure was not an option. Who is it? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man handed her a small, folded piece of paper. You'll find all the information you need here. Do not fail us, Mimi, or the consequences will be severe. Mimi took the paper, her hands trembling slightly. She could feel the weight of her decision pressing down on her. This was the price of the pact, a price she had been too blinded by ambition to fully understand. Without another word, the man disappeared into the shadows, leaving her alone in the factory with the darkness closing in. Mimi unfolded the small piece of paper with trembling hands. Her heart raced as her eyes scanned the page, and the shock of what she saw almost made her drop it. The name written there, in neat, blood-red ink, was one she knew well: Eric, one of her colleagues at the bank. He had been friendly, even helpful during her early days at the farm. But now, he was marked for to leave. Her thoughts spiraled. How was he a traitor? Had he also made a pact? And if so, how had he betrayed them? She couldn't make sense of it. Her mind screamed at her to walk away, to forget this madness. But deep down, Mimi knew that there was no going back. The pact had sealed her fate, and the boss's reach was vast and merciless. Failing them now would be worse. The man's parting words echoed in her mind: do not fail us. The ominous warning weighed heavily on her as she realized this wasn't just a test of loyalty, it was a test of how far she was willing to go for the power she craved. By the time she returned to her apartment, the city was silent, blanketed in the stillness of the early morning hours. Sleep was impossible. Mimi lay in her bed, staring up at the ceiling, the name Eric flashing like a warning sign in her mind. She knew she had to act quickly. The longer she waited, the greater the risk. The next morning, Mimi arrived at the bank, her senses heightened. Every glance, every whisper seemed like a threat. She found herself searching for Eric, studying his every movement, trying to see something, anything, that would reveal his betrayal. But he seemed as normal as ever. Smiling, shaking hands with clients, exchanging small talk with coworkers. He was just Eric, the friendly colleague everyone liked. That made it harder. How could she do this? She wasn't a maid to make people leave. Not yet. But later that afternoon, as she was grabbing a coffee in the break room, Eric walked in. He smiled at her, and something in his expression made her pause. There was something she hadn't noticed before. A slight flicker in his eyes, a kind of nervousness that wasn't there before. He knew something. Hey, Mimi, he said, his voice light. You okay? You've seemed a little off today. Mimi forced a smile. Yeah, I'm fine. Just a lot on my mind. Eric nodded, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly. I get it. This job can be stressful. He hesitated for a moment, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening, then lowered his voice. Listen, I've been meaning to talk to you. There's something going on here. Something big. And I think we're both in deeper than we realize. Mimi's heart skipped a beat. Did he know about her pact? Had he made one, too? She tried to stay calm, nodding slightly as she feigned ignorance. What do you mean? Eric glanced around again, then leaned in closer. There are people here, powerful people, who are involved in something dark. I don't know all the details, but I've heard whispers. It's dangerous, Mimi. And I think they're watching us. Mimi's stomach churned. He was onto something. She could see it in his eyes, he was scared. And now, she understood why he was the target. He had figured out too much. She needed to act, but the gravity of what she was about to do made her freeze. Before she could respond, Eric's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, frowned, and sighed. I have to go. But we should talk later, okay? Mimi nodded, her mind racing as he left the room. Her hands trembled as she clutched her coffee cup, the reality of the situation crashing down on her. Eric wasn't just a threat, he was about to expose the whole operation. She had no choice now. That night, Mimi received another message. This time, it was a set of instructions guiding her to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The location was far from the public eye, shrouded in shadows and forgotten by time. It was the perfect place to carry out her task. Mimi arrived just before midnight, her heart pounding as she entered the derelict building. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the sound of her footsteps echoed ominously through the empty halls. The only light came from the flickering flames of torches that lined the walls, casting long, dancing shadows that made the darkness feel alive. At the center of the warehouse, the boss waited, along with 3 other cloaked figures. The sight of them sent a chill down Mimi's spine. They were here to witness her initiation, to see if she could carry out the dark deed she had been tasked with. The boss stepped forward, his face hidden in the shadows of his hood. Do you understand what must be done? He asked, his voice low and commanding. Mimi nodded, her throat dry. Yes. The boss gestured to the side, and from the shadows, 2 more figures emerged, dragging Eric with them. He was bound, his eyes wide with fear as he struggled against his captors. Mimi's heart ached at the sight. Eric wasn't just a colleague, he was a friend. But now, he was a loose end, and loose ends didn't survive long in this world they had to live. This is your final test, the boss said, his voice as cold as the night air. To silence the traitor and prove your loyalty. Mimi's hands shook as one of the cloaked figures handed her a stick, its branches glinting in the torchlight. The weight of it felt heavy in her grasp, like the burden of the decision she was about to make. Eric's muffled cries echoed through the warehouse, pleading with her through terrified eyes. She could see the panic, the realization that he was going to get punished. The part of her that still held onto her humanity screamed at her to stop, to run, to find another way. But the pact was binding. Her soul was no longer hers. With trembling hands, Mimi raised the stick, her eyes locked onto Eric's. She wanted to tell him she was sorry, that she hadn't chosen this life, but the words never came. The cloaked figures began chanting, their voices rising in a haunting, rhythmic hum that seemed to make the shadows grow darker. The stick gleamed, poised to strike, and in that moment, something inside Mimi shifted. The power she had sought, the dark magic she had bound herself to, it surged through her veins, overwhelming her senses. She could feel it now, a living force inside her, hungry and insatiable. In a single, swift motion, she plunged the stick into Eric's leg. His eyes widened in shock, his body in pain. The chanting grew louder, more frenzied, as if the very air was feeding on him. And as Eric's body got weaker, Mimi felt the darkness inside her expand, filling the void where her conscience had once been. She had crossed the final threshold. The boss stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with approval. You've done well, Mimi. You are one of us now. The power you sought is yours, but remember, there is always a price. Mimi stood there, her mind reeling from what she had just done. She had punished someone she had once called a friend. And yet, she felt no remorse. Only the cold, unyielding certainty that this was the path she had chosen. The pact was complete. Mimi stood over Eric, her mind swirling with conflicting emotions, a fear, power, regret, and something far darker. The chanting of the cloaked figures had stopped, leaving an eerie silence in the warehouse. The boss stepped closer, his face still obscured by his hood, but she could feel his satisfaction radiating from him. "You've passed the test," he said, his voice smooth and unnerving. "From this day forward, you belong to the Brotherhood." Mimi's heart raced. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but it never felt this hollow. The power she now held came with a weight that crushed her soul. She had made her choice, and there was no going back. The boss extended his hand, and from the shadows, a book, ancient and bound in black leather, floated into his grasp. "This is the Codex Noctis," he said, his tone reverent. "Within it lies the knowledge of the ages, the darkest spells, and the keys to unimaginable power. You will study it, and with it, you will learn to bend the very fabric of reality to your will." Mimi's breath caught in her throat as the boss placed the book in her hands. It felt alive, humming with an ancient energy that pulsed through her veins. She knew that once she opened its pages, there would be no turning back. But the hunger for power, for control, consumed her. "You are no longer a mere mortal," the boss continued. "You are a vessel for the dark magic of the ancients. Your destiny is to reshape the world according to the will of the Brotherhood. But remember this, power without control is chaos. Master it, or it will destroy you." Mimi nodded, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. She had passed the test, but the real battle was just beginning. Will Mimi accept that her destiny is to reshape the world according to the will of the Brotherhood, or will she not? Join us on the next episode to find out.